Hey guys, it's Brandon, creator of Happily Dressed, a sewing resource dedicated to self-acceptance, self-confidence, and self-sufficiency, and welcome back to the channel. Today we are sewing up this fun harness vest. That is my next pattern. It is called the half pint harness. Everything that you need to know about it will be included down in the description below. It's a beginner-friendly sewing pattern, and to see how other people are styling the half pint harness, you can just go on Instagram and search that hashtag. Everything you need and everything that I use in this video will be linked down below. And to keep this intro short and sweet, let's get started. So like standard practice with any PDF pattern, we're going to cut the sides. I'm going to cut the right and the bottom side of each piece of paper so that way I can tile my pattern together. You just need some tape. I like to use a paper cutter. You can use scissors, a rotary cutter, ruler, cutting mat, etc. You can skip this page. This is just a test that you printed out your pattern right and that your dimensions are correct. You would just use these squares to test out if your printer settings were correct when you printed it out. So this square is supposed to be 2 by 2, and that it is, 2 by 2. So now I know I can start cutting and taping. So now that I have all my pages taped together, I'm going to use my rotary cutter to cut them all out. Just a few things. I use cardstock because I know that this size fits me because I've tried it before. So like a little hack I have is to use cardstock with your patterns. They last a little bit longer than regular printer paper. And then also to conserve tape, I like to just tape where I know I'm going to cut a line first. And that ensures too I don't have to retape once I cut out the pattern piece. So once you're done cutting everything out, here are your pattern pieces. You should have 5, but this is all you need to get started. So I'll be using this beautiful brown denim I got from Mood Fabrics when I was in Miami. Super excited to dig into this. I got enough to definitely make a matching set plus this. Because this is such a big piece of denim, I'm kind of just cutting it the best way I can because I don't want to cut out a big chunk of this to cut this out. I want to keep it all in one piece. So that is what I'm going to do. So now that we have all of our pieces cut out, we can start assembling the harness, starting with the straps. Because the first thing we're going to do is press all of our straps in half, right sides facing, with the iron. So now that we have our 4 straps pressed, we're gonna take them over to the sewing machine and sew them closed at 3/8 of an inch at the top and down the side on all 4. So I have my stitch length on my sewing machine set at 3. I have my stitch guide at straight stitch. I'm gonna use my seam allowance gauge here under the foot to make sure I'm sewing at 3/8 of an inch. Now that our straps are sewn, I'm gonna cut them down to make them easier to turn, especially because this is denim. And then now I'm going to use this tool that I got from Joanne to help me turn these right side out. I've only used this a couple of times. You can also use a safety pin or sew these closed with thread at the top so you can pull that thread. But how you use this tool is you insert it into the edge and then you can use the pointy part or you can use the blunt part. I like to use the blunt part so I don't poke through my fabric. But you use that to push your fabric through this opening. Ooh. I had to use some pressure because it's thick in there. But then from there, you can use the pointy part to get your edges back out. So here they are pressed. It's funny because as I'm working on this tutorial, I'm also realizing like, oh, that could change in the instructions. So actually what I'm sure I'm going to do is have you sew one strap A and one strap B completely closed at the top and at the side at 3/8 of an inch. And then the other 2 strap A's, you'll just sew down the side seam. So that way it leaves both sides open of your 2 strap adjuster pieces. So now that I have my straps top stitched, we can move on to creating the front pocket. So with our pocket, we're going to take our 2 pocket flat pieces, face them right sides together, like this, like they already are. We're going to pin it in place, and then sew these 2 pieces together right here on the curve at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now setting our sewing machine aside, I'm going to use my scissors to clip into these curves, especially because this is denim, but this will just help our flap stay as rounded as possible. So I'm cutting as close as I can to the stitching line, but also making sure I don't cut past or through my stitching line. So now I'm gonna take this over to my iron, flip it right side out, and give it a good press. So now I'm gonna go over to my other sewing machine and top stitch this around the edge. I went ahead and serged it as well. So now dealing with our bigger pocket piece, what we're gonna do is fold in this top edge by 3/8 of an inch. I'm using my heat ruler to make sure I get that exact. You can also use a seam gauge or your best judgment if you want to. And then from there, I'm gonna turn it right side up, use my fold line, which I notched with my pair of scissors, and press down this hem at the fold line. Now I'm gonna go over to my sewing machine, sew around this edge exactly at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. Now I'm gonna take this over to my serger and serge the raw edges. If you do not have one, you can also use a zigzag stitch. So now that we have that sewn and serged, what we're gonna do is use a point turner to turn out our edges. Make sure we get those corners nice and sharp. And we're gonna press down that hem. I know it might be a little difficult to see because my hand is covering it, but I'm just using my fingers to expose that seam line we just sewn, so I know I'm pressing the correct seam allowance in. And use some steam if you have to, but there you go. So I'm gonna flip it right side up, give it a press this way, and then go over to my sewing machine and top stitch this top pocket hem down. So now that we have both of our pocket pieces pressed and top stitched, we're gonna take one of our harness pieces and make it the front of the harness, and we're going to attach our pocket and pocket flap. Starting with the pocket, you want it to sit centered 1.5 inches above the bottom. And once you get that in place, making sure that your folded seam allowance stays where it's supposed to be, you can pin it in place. I like to start with the two sides, then hit the bottom. And now if you're using a separate top stitching thread, you're gonna take this to that machine and top stitch this down. So now that that is top stitched on, I'm gonna grab my pocket flap, and with the right side of the flap facing the harness, I'm gonna place it above that pocket flap at 1/4 inch, pin it in place, and sew it along the edge here, right at that serge line or at 3/8 of an inch seam allowance. So now that we have that pocket attached and top stitched, we're going to grab our straps and place them so we can stay stitch them in place. So our longer strap is going to go here on the left side. Our enclosed shoulder strap is going to go here at the top on the right. And these are our two straps for our strap adjusters, which will actually get folded in half over the strap adjuster. So let me grab that. I got these 1.5 inch strap adjusters from Joann. I'll link some down below as well. But basically all we're gonna do is insert our smaller straps into the strap adjuster and then wrap it around this middle bar here and pull it back out. So here's what it'll look like once it's in. And then now we can place these at the top here on the right side. Do the same thing to the other strap and place that down here too on the right side. So now I'm gonna pin these all in place in the middle, centered to the curve, and with my sewing machine, secure them down at like 1/4 inch with a stay stitch, which is just your longest stitch length. So that way we know they won't move. If you like doing a bit of hand sewing, you can hand base these in place, but make sure to do it within the seam allowance so that way when we sew this closed, you will not see your basting stitch. Oh, really quickly, this is also the time if you've sewn a sample that you can shorten these straps if you need to, or shorten these straps if you need to. Or even if you sewed them and figure out you need to make them longer, then that's what you can do for the next one. So one more thing I forgot to mention when stay stitching these straps down is that you want the right side of your strap, since I use top stitching and then regular thread at the bottom. So you want the right side of that strap to be facing the right side of the harness. So I went ahead and flipped these so they were facing the harness. And then actually these don't really matter because on either side you still get a top stitch edge. But on these two it's really important to make sure that the right side is facing the right side of the harness. But moving on, we're gonna grab now what we have allocated to be the back, face it right side down, and start to line it up on top of our front. So what I like to do is start from the middle and then pin around. And don't forget we're gonna be leaving about a 4-inch gap right here on both of our horizontal straps. One of them will help us turn this whole thing right side out, and then both of them will help us press out our curves and edges with a point turner once we sew this closed. So we're gonna go ahead and pin this down, matching the curves. Freak! Definitely just stabbed myself. Oh, I hate that. Now that we have this all pinned in place, we're going to sew around the edge and the bottom, leaving a 4-inch gap. Don't forget, we'll be sewing this at 3/8 of an inch. And be careful because these pins are sharp. And make sure if you stay stitched right before this that you move this back to your intended stitch length and not your longest. So once you have that sewn, what we're gonna do now is just clip into our curves. We have a lot of them, so get your sharpest pair of scissors, put a good song on your headphones, and just go for it. This is important, especially when you're using a heavier fabric. It'll allow your fabric to stretch to all of these curves. You can even trim down the seam allowance if you want to as well. So once you have everything clipped, we're gonna go through and just use one of our openings to pull everything through. This is where you want to make sure you left a big enough hole so things can start to come through without ripping your stitching line. And I'm just going through with my fingers, getting as much of my hand in there as I can, and then using my fingers to grab the straps or the strap adjusters and pulling them through. There we go. So now you see we have what will be a completed harness. Best thing to do at this step, because it's looking a little crazy, is to grab your point turner and start to push out some of these curves. This is where you'll use both openings to kind of just get in and follow that seam line to push out your seams flush with one another and to get some of that rounded shape back. And this will take some work. So I mean, honestly, sit down if you need to, but the better you do this, the easier it'll be to iron this flat and top stitch. So once you get those curves as pushed out as possible, you can come over to the iron and start to press them flat so we can top stitch our holes closed and be done with the vest. And you'll notice too, once you start giving it some heat, that it'll start to look more finished. So now this is all pressed out, I'm gonna take it over to my top stitching sewing machine, which is just my second domestic with top stitching thread, and top stitch this clothes and style the vest. All right, now we can try the completed harness on. I have switched my outfit to this shirt. Don't ask me where I got it because then I'll have to tell you what I've been working on. But the first thing we're gonna do is the shoulder strap. So I'm gonna take the shoulder strap and feed it through the strap adjuster on both sides and pull as tightly as I need to or as loosely as I need to. Once we have that shoulder strap on, we can go ahead, put it on. I like that. I might even drop it just a little bit lower. Oh yeah, that's really nice. And then now, taking my longer string, grabbing that strap adjuster and doing the same thing from behind me. And then from there, we can tighten as much as we need to get this thing going. There we go. So we have more of a relaxed feel. But yeah, I love the addition of the pocket on the side. You can keep all your essentials in there if it's a phone or keys, whatever you need. The pocket size does change with your sizing, but it can still be very helpful. But yeah, I also love the asymmetry. This pattern is just a fun one to make and a pretty quick one to sew up. Thank you guys so much for purchasing the half pint harness if you have and watching this tutorial. If you do make one and post it on social media, make sure you use the hashtag halfpintharness and tag me at happilydressed. If you want more tutorial and sewing related content, make sure you hit that subscribe button down below. Turn on the notification bell to be notified when I post a new video or tutorial for a new pattern. Wink wink. And until next time, I will catch you all in my next video. See you guys later.